Welcome to the Integration Talks, a new episode about system integrations, especially focused on multi-vendor or cross-company integrations itself. Today, I'm welcoming Steve Morgan from Syniad IT, and welcome, Steve. How are you doing?
Hi, yeah, I'm good. Really pleased to be here. Thanks for having me along. Be really keen to chat to you today, and we can work through some of these service integration challenges that you're gonna pose. So
All right.
pleased to be here. Thanks, Francis.
So what's Syniad IT? What's your company doing?
So we're based in the UK. We work with clients across the globe, not just in the UK, but across Europe, North America as well. The primary aim of the organization is to help IT leaders improve their IT operations. The specialisms around IT service management, so things like ITIL, and then in the last 5 or 6 years, we've been turning our attention to service integration and management, or SIAM, or SIAM, depending on where you are in the world.
Yeah, right.
And as an organization, we've been involved both on the one hand in the development of collateral around SIAM, so there's some books that we've been involved in developing, and on the other hand, delivering real projects, real world SIAM projects for our clients, from design through to build, implementation, and run, and we cover that whole gamut. So yeah, relatively small organization, but very nimble, very flexible, and able to help customers kind of whatever the challenge, be it large or small, really. So yeah, that's what we're doing, and we've found ourselves in a position where we're quite widely regarded as being experts in the field. So it's really a strong place to be.
It's getting more and more interesting environment to be in, right? With this, we need to have more effective cooperation with your suppliers, right? And
yes, absolutely. I think the tides are changing, aren't they? The culture that we used to have, where we'd have kind of one supplier who would deliver everything in a monolithic contract for us, and we would kind of beat that supplier up with a big stick, and work harder, work better, work more reliably. I think those days are gone, and I think that organizations are looking for more of a partnership model with their suppliers, and suppliers are more able to really add value to the business of their customers, rather than just be seen as a commodity provider like a telephony provider, or the guy who provides the photocopiers, or that kind of thing. It's more than commodity. There's some real business value to be added there, I think.
Yeah, so IT systems are much more than only like a connection to your telephone system, right? It's the whole combination of services which makes it well tick and be valued by your staff, right?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of opportunities for clients to make efficiency and cost savings in the way they deliver IT today, and therefore the move to multi-vendor operating models helps organizations to achieve that, really, by putting the suppliers into a position where they're delivering best of breed services, rather than trying to be what we would call a jack of all trades, trying to do everything. So they deliver the things they're good at, and in doing that, they're able to deliver more focused propositions to the customer, and then they're then able to then look at the value add element on top of whatever it is they're providing. So there's some real benefit there potentially for organizations to look at moving more to a multi-vendor model.
But then you're moving the problem to integrating all these different best of breed services into one service towards your own IT. to your colleagues and to your staff, right? So
Absolutely. I think that's where the importance of the integrator role comes in, though. So, what SIAM talks about is not only moving to a multi-vendor model where you can leverage some of those benefits that I talked about. So, customer intimacy, value, business value, efficiency, cost, all that kind of stuff, best of breed. But also then that you've got that integration function there, bringing those things together, and knitting those services together. Now, there's some challenges there in that organizations need to be able to understand the relationships between the services that they're delivering and the infrastructure that's delivering it, right? So organizations have never been really good at that. There's mythical content, isn't there, in configuration management database material in ITIL that says, you build this all singing, all dancing CMDB. I always think that the CMDB is a little bit like the Loch Ness Monster in that a lot of people talk about it, but no one's really ever seen one.
yeah, indeed.
And SIAM actually does require a level of maturity in that business service mapping arena to really get the benefits from it. And I think supplier organizations are getting better at helping organizations to achieve that. And then with a lot of the tooling, the service management tooling that sits into that service integration layer, that's advancing as well. And therefore, we are now beginning to see a greater level of maturity around incident, problem, change, configuration management, the ability to tie all those service elements together to form something coherent to the end users.
Could you just for our listeners highlight the basic concept behind SIAM?
Sure, yeah. So what SIAM talks about is moving to a multi-vendor model where you have best of breed suppliers, as we've talked about, engaging in the delivery of IT services, and their services are brought together by an integrator or a service integrator. Now that can either be an integrator who is in-house within the customer's organization, or can be an integrator who specializes in those service integration services, a supplier themselves. And there are pros and cons to that approach, depending on which, there's never a single answer for a particular organization. And that service integrator takes accountability for the services that are being delivered by the suppliers, and ultimately then the services that are being delivered to the business. And it covers not just the service management elements of it, so the things that we might all recognize of, as I said, I reel these things off, incident, problem, change, configuration, service request, release, all of those things. The old ITIL, the ITIL concepts, absolutely. But also, it includes the whole service life cycle. So from demand, so someone having an idea in the business and that being made into an IT piece of work, if it's a project or a small task or whatever, through to the design, the build, the implementation, the testing of that service, and then ultimately the run, which is the bit that we often get fixated with, just that IT service management layer. But it covers that whole life cycle, and I'm always at great pains to point that out, in that what SIAM really is a type of IT operating model. Now, it's not one that's exclusive, so you can still work within a DevOps operating model, for example. You can still adopt cloud infrastructure, for example. So it isn't to the exclusion of everything else. It's like a tool in your toolbox. If a plumber turns up at your house, he doesn't just have one wrench, and that's the same principle, really. SIAM is one of those tools that you would use in a multi-vendor operating model.
Okay, all right. So you mentioned the system integrator could be in-house or like an external system?
the service integrator. Yep.
Oh, sorry, services integrator. But how is that contract-wise? Is the company then going get a contract with the external service integrator, who then contracts the suppliers, or?
Yeah. So generally, so how it works is the customer has all the contractual relationships. So
Mhm.
he contracts the service integrator. He also contracts with the suppliers, and there's generally a form of collaboration agreement between the suppliers and the integrator that underpins it to enable them to work together.
Okay.
Think of operational level agreement, or OLA, if you will,
Okay.
in ITIL terms, and that provides that kind of level of cooperation between these suppliers.
Mhm.
Now, what I was alluding to earlier when we said service integrator could be internal or external, you
Yeah.
touched there on one of the issues in that if the service integrator is external,
Mhm.
then we have to have that contractual relationship with him,
Of course.
and he will want contractual measures around his performance, clearly,
Mhm.
because you want to kind of manage them. Whereas an internal service integrator can often be an easier method, depending on the capability of the organization. So if they've got lots of mature processes and lots of highly capable people, then building a service integrator function could be really straightforward.
Yeah.
If they've got low maturity of process and not very many people who are capable, then an external service integrator function might be more appropriate.
Yeah,
And
because
often what you sorry,
the external service integrator has all the experience of setting up
yeah,
that relationship. Yeah.
absolutely, and often what we see is the service integrator function being part of something like the service desk contract, for example,
Mhm.
where there's that whole service management customer intimacy layer is there anyway, and they just repurpose those services. So you often see that, but there's
Mhm.
a lot of providers in the market who are providing those service integration services.
Really?
Yeah, and I guess the risk there is, what if they're providing the hosting service as well? Are they not conflict of interest? Poacher turned gamekeeper, as we might say.
Mhm.
And I think there is a risk there. So the organization, the customer organization, has to be really mindful of who is doing that service integrator function. Are they going to be equally fair to
Uh,
everybody, or are
uh,
they going to be more fair to some people than others?
yeah, yeah, indeed.
So they need to be independent.
Yeah, yeah. You need these check and balances, and having an independent service integrator taking care of all these contracts with suppliers and the
Yes.
services that they provide is
Yep.
it's a better model to go forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you tend to see
Mm,
is organizations adopting a hybrid model.
mm,
So in some areas they might not be as strong as they are in others. So let's say, for example, they're really strong in service management,
mhm,
so they'll do that themselves, but
mm.
they'll work with a partner organization to deliver things that they're not as strong in. So let's say they're not as strong in solution design
Yeah.
or testing.
Or
Uh,
also, oh,
yeah, exactly. It could be any of those. So that you'll work with a partner organization to either do those activities for them or
mm,
upskill their organizations. So one of my customers at the moment is doing exactly that. They've engaged with one of the big outsourcers who are providing that upskill capability to the organization whilst they bring up that level of knowledge within their own organization.
mm. Okay, so you get a couple of really good blog posts on your
Thank you.
site.
Yeah. Yep.
So one of them is like the 8 key factors of the SIAM operating model.
Yep.
Yeah. So and that's pretty interesting. So could you talk with which what are these factors?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So there is quite a lot of content on the Syniad website. So if your listeners want to come onto the Syniad website and search for something, they'll always find something of interest there. We cover lot of subject areas.
Mm.
But in the case of SIAM, a lot of my blogs, they tend to be quite a little bit like a rant. We tend to kind of, we come off of a client and we do a lessons learned activity. And we say, well, what did we learn there? And I go, well, they didn't have this and they didn't have that. And if only they had this, and life would have been simpler, and so on and so forth. And I then convert those into blogs.
Mm.
So in the case of this 8 things I've learned, what I did there was I'll rattle through the 8 things, right? So number 1 was change is hard. So we shouldn't underestimate the amount of change effort that we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, SIAM isn't just service management, as I alluded to earlier on. So we shouldn't think SIAM equals ITIL, right? Because it's bigger than that, right? It's across the whole service lifecycle. Changing contracts is really hard. So we have to be really careful about, if you've got contracts that are in flight, you need to be careful of those. Tooling is my sort of subject area of deep expertise, and therefore having a strategy that says this is what we're going to do around tooling is really important to develop early on, so you know who's going to own what in terms of tools, what your approach is going to be. You're going to have a single ITSM tool, or you're going to have a free for all and let everyone bring their own. There's pros and cons to these things which got to be considered.
Okay.
The next one was, some people are just winging it and people don't always understand what it is you're telling them. So you can sit in a meeting where people nod and smile and they don't necessarily understand what you're saying. So you have to test that knowledge, which is true in life as well as just in operating model change. There's no one size fits all, right? So that's the other challenge. There isn't a solution that I can't tear the page out of the book and say to you, there you are, there's the answer, because it's different every time.
In 2 months' time, we will build your service integrator.
Absolutely. Just add water, watch it grow, it'll be fine. And there isn't that. There's no panacea. There's no golden bullet here.
Yeah, you have to work with them.
You need to have an effective governance model, was the other observation that I'd made. And then I rounded off with a real personal one for me, in that cultural change is your biggest barrier. And I think this is absolutely critical. We can write processes, we can bring tools in, we can introduce governance and new suppliers, and we still have a failing organization. And cultural change is absolutely critical to recognize and to get right.
Yeah. So everybody in the how do you call it? The team of service providers who are going to cooperate to implement the services need to come with the mindset we are working together.
Yes, absolutely. And and then what you find, if you can, if you think about it like a football team, right? You think about Manchester United, or they're supposedly the best team in the world, right? But they're only as good as the 11 players that they have. And all of those 11 players all have to have exactly the same mindset.
Yeah.
And if one of those players suddenly thinks, well, I'm more important than all the others, or if one of the players says, well, I'm not feeling particularly motivated to go and win the Champions League, then the whole team fails. And in a SIAM model, it's one of the disadvantages of SIAM, right, is that you've not only got one monolithic supplier, you might have 8, 9, 10 or more suppliers and an integrator to manage. And you've got to get everybody following the same set of principles, working practices, working in a collaborative way. And that's a massive challenge.
Yeah,
and metrics drive behaviors, so we have to be really careful that we've got the right SLAs in place, because if we're not careful, we can't engender the right behaviors because the SLAs are driving a different behavior. So there's a lot of complexity around that. And then there's the actual personal motivation that individuals feel. So there's a corporate culture, but there'll be a personal culture, the values that we all hold true. And if some individuals aren't pushing in the right direction, that too can drag it down. So there is a lot of potential challenge here in the cultural change issue, and for me, it's the biggest one to get right, and it's the biggest one that organisations ignore.
Yeah. Don't you then get to, we know these suppliers, we know how they cooperate, how willingly that they are to cooperate. So we will go with these guys, even if other guys are would be a better match.
Yeah, and I think often the client organisations have the wrong criteria for selection. You often see they'll go with the cheapest, or they'll go with the one they know because he's been delivering services for 20 years, so he'll be their favourite. But the cultural match is so important. So important to all of this. You can bring the best player in the football team into the team, and he still won't make the team successful. He'll still go off and try and do his own thing or be a prima donna or whatever, and will not make the team successful. So it has to be considered in the round.
So a typical problem that you see when multiple vendors are cooperating is like the application is slow. There's a performance problem to give you. So how do you then ensure that everyone is aligned and works towards a solution? Not say, well, it's the network or the networking guys saying, oh,
always the network. It's always the code.
Yeah, it's always the application is slow or the database. So
yeah.
Do you have any examples there?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things really. So you're trying to engender a one team approach, right? So I think there's a few things that I've seen that have been highly successful. So firstly is I don't know if you have this TV program in Europe. It's called Back to the Floor, and it's where the senior leadership go to the front line of the businesses that they're running. So if you had someone who's managing a clothes shop, he goes to work on the till in the clothes shop to be the cashier for the day, to understand how the business works, right? So I've seen, for example, suppliers working in the business of the organizations that they're working for to understand the business better. I think that's been really useful, because when that application is slow, they understand the impact of it, right? That's the most important thing. I think the next thing is a little more soft, and it's around ensuring that there's an ongoing program of working together in a collaborative way, and that can be at a process perspective for things like continual service improvement programs, that they're not done by one supplier, that they all work collaboratively on a solution to improve things. And secondly, around things like social events and that kind of stuff. Get the suppliers to work together on things like team building events and that kind of stuff, and that engenders the right approach. And then your final elements are probably a bit harder. They're things like the contractual framework and the processes and the governance that supports it. I saw one client that had a really novel approach. If an organization was seen to be not working to the values, the CEO of that organization would have to deliver £1, €1, to the CEO of the organization, of the customer, and say, I'm sorry, here's your euro, I failed, and this is why I failed. And it was a silly measure. We rarely had to use it with that customer. We rarely had to execute it, because they knew that if there was an occasion where the service integrator said, hang on a minute, supplier X, they're not really towing the line here. They've pulled up the shutters, and they've said it's not our problem, and we're not talking to anybody.
Yeah,
that would be something that would be played back, and their CEO would have to take £1 to the CEO of the organisation they're working for. And it was a silly measure, but it drove the right behaviour. Right? No one wanted to be the one who was going to have to take that coin and give it to the guy.
They had to give it in person.
In person, yeah, in person. It was really a really impossible thing for some organisations. They didn't want to do this, but it drove the right behaviour, right? We never had to use it.
Watch out, you will have to go to the CEO, to the boss.
Exactly. You're going to go to the boss with the euro if you're gonna behave like that. And oh, okay, yeah, no, we don't want to do that. So it was a good way of driving. So we have to think. We have to think creatively.
You could also use it internally, right? So if
yes.
you don't do this, bring €1 to the boss.
Yeah, exactly. I failed. I'm sorry. Here's my €1. Why are you here? Well, I was in a meeting and, I did this. You've got to, it's an old school kind of thing. It's like going to the headmaster's office at school, isn't it? But it works. No one wants to do it, right? So, I wouldn't say it's the right answer for every customer, but it was something that worked on this particular customer.
Okay, it's a good one.
And we do, things like this, vlogs and podcasts for the client as well, collaborative things, so two suppliers will get together and produce a YouTube video or something for that customer that says, this is how we're helping you together, this is how we work together. Things like that which can help engender that right culture.
Okay, all right. Nice. So one of the points you bring in your blog about the 8 key factors is a tooling strategy. Yeah.
Yes.
So, and you told you're a bit that's a bit your real focus. Could you say something about what?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So IT tooling is a really complex area, right? So when we're in our service management world, we have to think about incident and problem and change management, and typically the ITSM tools come to our minds, right? So BMC Remedy, ServiceNow, For Me, Hornbill, all the big tools that play in this area. And then around the periphery of that, you've got other tooling, things like event management, you've got asset management, you've got capacity performance management tools, perhaps
security tools, whatever.
There's a whole wealth of stuff, right? And then you might have tooling that manages your project management workflow. So you might have a plan view or a Primavera or something like that that manages project delivery. And where the tooling challenge comes is that in the multi-vendor operating model, you need to think about who owns those tools. So is that the customer organization, the service integrator, if you're outsourcing that, or is it the supplier themselves in some cases? So things like software distribution might be owned by your desktop supplier. But it's important to have that clarity of the ownership. And then you've got to start to think about, well, what's the integrations between those tools and how do we manage that? So in the case of service management or project management workflow, it's quite sensible to have one tool that works across all the suppliers. But how practical is that, where suppliers might also have their own tools? So you need to think about what your end state needs to be from a tooling perspective to ensure that you have a coherent strategy that says these are all the tools that we're thinking about, this is where they're going to be owned, and this is how they're going to work together, and these are the tools that we expect a supplier to bring, these are the tools that are our enterprise tools that everybody will use regardless of your supplier status or where you are. And that tooling strategy really sets the scene for all of those things. And it's important to have it developed before you start engaging with suppliers, because the moment you engage with a supplier, they'll all give you their advice. And if you're engaging with, let's say you've got 10 contracts, and for each contract, there's 4 potential suppliers. So you're going to have 40 voices all telling you the best way to do it. And I can guarantee that not one of those voices are going to be the same as anyone else. So you're going to have 40 differing views of how tooling should work across your enterprise.
Mm.
And some of the elements of what they're saying are going to be right, but if you're not careful, you just end up getting really confused as a customer. So
Yeah,
where we've worked with organizations in the past is to set that strategy up front and then to tell the service providers. Now it can be refined, but it's a starting point, right? You've got to start somewhere. Otherwise, you've got 40 voices talking to you, and every one of those 40 voices is a different opinion. You can
yeah,
imagine it'd be hard to make progress and
yeah,
get
of
anywhere.
course.
So that's the aim. That's the aim of the tooling strategy. It's good that you should ask about it because there's a white paper on the website that people can download around it if they want to learn more around
Okay.
around tooling strategy.
Yeah, you want to avoid to get into a patchwork of tools because keeping a
Yes.
consistency between all of them. So, for
Yep.
instance, if you have like a severity A problem that needs to be
Yes.
solved by two suppliers, but
Yes.
how do you do that translation, right?
Yeah, exactly. The data model that underpins it, you need to have a single common data model. You need to hopefully be using single tools. Otherwise, you'll have to build an integration between
Yeah,
every tool.
yeah.
And that's complex to do, and it's complex to maintain as well. The
Especially the
maintenance of it,
maintenance. Yeah.
yeah, that's really, that can be really challenging. There are tools in the market that that look to support that
Hmm.
that integration activity, um, and they're also worth looking into for some of those challenges to ensure that those those challenges can be addressed perhaps in terms of maintenance and so on. So that's really an interesting area. But I think the most important thing for me is a single data model,
Mm.
a single source of the truth. Yeah, so one place where you can go and get a reliable source of data. Now, it
Mm.
doesn't matter if that data is aggregated from a lot of different sources.
Yeah.
Um, but as long as there's one place you can go for it, rather than three different versions of the truth that are all telling you different answers, that's
Yeah.
really confusing from a service health, cost, efficiency, reliability. You're not going to be getting reliable data on any of that.
Do you know any examples of such data model which can be like a book about such a data model or a site which provides
I think
examples of
so.
such?
Some of the big service integration providers have
uh,
thought about this. So there's some good white papers out there. We've got examples of ones that we've developed with other customers.
okay.
We haven't got around to writing the blog yet. But your listeners can always contact me, and I'm very happy to discuss particular challenges around data model and make some examples available if they wish.
Yeah.
Um, but I think you just got to think about both the physical and the logical entities that you're trying to tie together, and
Mhm.
what the relationships are between them.
Yeah. But once that you have a data model, you can, well, the suppliers can then translate it into whatever they are using, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's multiple tools out there, then having that underpinning data model is a really good mechanism because
Yeah.
you can overlay, well, what tools look after what data and how are they integrated to one another.
Mm. So regarding this tooling strategy, so I can imagine that you define such a tooling strategy, but
Mhm.
is your selection of the suppliers depending on it? Like, would you adapt it
Oh,
or not?
no. So no, I think having the tooling strategy in place is really important to have it up front.
Mhm.
I think you then talk to the suppliers, and your contract requirements that you will start to engage with your suppliers will be driven by the contents of the tooling strategy.
Mhm.
As you onboard your suppliers,
Mhm.
so as they have provided their responses in their RFPs, and you've evaluated them, and then you get into transition of the
Mhm.
of the service, they'll bring more knowledge, and you'll be able to refine your approach to the tooling strategy. You'll be able to start to build out the data model in more
Yeah.
detail.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think doing the thinking up front, and then it's iterated. I don't think a tooling strategy is written once and then put on the shelf and never seen again. It's something that evolves over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. All very interesting. Some things that we were wondering also is about the contracts that you establish with the suppliers. Like, would you then have like one type of contract for all the different services, or would you have like per category of service you have a different type of contract?
So I think there's got to be commonalities in the contract. So in particular, things like the governance model for the contracts, that can be a single governance model that covers everybody. I think some contracts are going to be more important than others. Some will be smaller and less critical than other contracts.
Yeah, of course.
But I think you should aim to have a common service level agreement standard across all the contracts, so everyone's working to a very similar set of targets, if not exactly the same targets.
In timing of intervention, responses.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of response time to tickets, in terms of recovery time, by ticket priority, and those kind of things. So I think having a common set of content that goes into contracts rather than writing each one individually and tailoring it is a better way to go in my experience. Because then when you come to measure it, your measurement is simpler. You don't want to have a very, very complex measurement regime whereby, let's say, for example, I'm supplier A and you're supplier B, and I pass a ticket. I get a ticket from the service desk to resolve. My SLA clock is ticking, and then I look at it and go, no, that's not me, that's Francis. So I pass it over to you. What happens to your SLA clock then? Does that start from 0, or does it start from 40 minutes that I've spent looking at it before I've decided it's you? So there's some complexity that needs to be worked through in the contractual space. So having a common set of standards, common set of measures to work from, and some common approaches to things like that. What happens when? Where does the clock stop? Where does the clock start? Because suppliers will still be interested in that, even if they're working in this really collaborative environment where they'll be working, with lots of different suppliers. They're still going to be interested in what's the SLA regime. So it's good to have some commonality around that, so that there's no bad feeling. I said at the start, metrics drive behaviors. If you've got the wrong metrics, or there's a sense that someone's got more generous metrics than you've got, my metrics are too hard, that supplier's got easier one, that's not fair. You don't want to get into that sort of scenario. So it's good to have some commonality there if you can.
Okay, all right, very interesting. I think that our time is up. No, it's finished.
Okay.
We did touch a couple of really interesting points, which can be further elaborated. People, I guess, we will be publishing your links together with the podcast. And
that's great.
I hope I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, really good speaking to you. And if any of the listeners want to reach out, always happy to have a chat and work things through. We're not an organisation that is unfriendly. We like to build those relationships. So by all means, get in touch, and we'll be happy to discuss with you further. Thanks for having me on, though, Francis. It was really good to speak to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Bye.